Okay, so let me talk a little bit about what prefixes are. So what we think of the metric system is called the System International. And that System International is French for International System, or SI for short. In SI measurements, you will have a base unit like the meter or the liter, and then the kilogram is another base unit. But again, most of the time, you will not be making measurements or even calculations using these base units. And so to give you some examples of that, can you imagine measuring a length of the football field with the meter? So you probably are not going to be using the meter to represent the length of a football field. You may want to use maybe a part of a kilometer. That may be closer to it. Or when I used to work in the lab, the volumes of liquid I worked with were never in, say, 1 liter or 2 liter or a half liter even. They were usually in a millionth of a liter, or something called a microliter. So again, we probably won't use base units that much in the calculations. We're going to be using something related to that. Okay. So at this point, it would be kind of good to think of ways that we could represent multiples of the base unit. So tens of the base unit would be good, 10 times the base unit, 100 times or 1,000 times the base unit, or even more, or maybe a tenth of the base unit, or a hundredth of the base unit, or a thousandth of the base unit. So the way we represent those multiples of the base unit is we use something called prefixes. So here are a couple of examples of prefixes. So if we want to say 1,000 of a base unit, we would say a kilogram, for example. If we want to say 100th of a base unit, we would say like a centigram. Okay, and there the base unit being the gram. Okay, so here are the prefixes that you need to know. So what you can see is that the name of the prefix is on the left, and then the symbol is next, and then there's the multiplier, which I'll talk about in a minute, and then there's an example. So for example, you see at the very top, the prefix is tera. And so what tera means, it's basically a shortened word for a trillion. So when you have a tera, you have a trillion of something. So for example, if the base unit is a meter, if you have a terameter, you have a trillion of meters. So 1 terameter is equal to 1 trillion meters. And so we can represent that a little bit with numbers. So 1 terameter is equal to a trillion, which is 1 times 10 to the 12 meters. So you can go further down that list, and you can see that there are prefixes for a million, or excuse me, rather a billion of something, which would be a giga, or a million or something of something, which would be mega, and then 1,000 of something, which would be kilo. So for example, if you had 1,000 meters, that'd be 1 kilometer. So 1 km is equal to 1,000 meters. Or you can write out 1 km is equal to 1,000 meters, like that. Okay, so what we've done is we've gone from the base unit and gone up in multiples of 10. And so we're just getting larger and larger numbers. Now you can go the opposite direction. You can start at the base unit and take a tenth of that. If you take a tenth of that, that prefix would be decity. If you take 100th of the base unit, it would be centi. If you take 1,000th of the base unit, it would be milli. Then there's some other unusual ones you need to know as well. If you take a millionth of the base unit, it would be a micro. And if you take a billionth of the base unit, it would be a nano. If you take a trillionth of the base unit, it would be a pico. And I don't know what the word for femto is, but it is 1 times 10 to the negative 15 of the base unit. So I can tell you that. Okay, so to give you some examples of that, so you're going to be using milli quite a bit. So let's say you want to know how many grams 1 milligram is. And so you would write that out like this: 1 milligram, and then you sort of have to memorize the exponent on the chart. The exponent is 1 times 10 to the negative 3, so you would write 1 milligram is equal to 1 times 10 to the negative 3 grams. if you have a microgram, 1 microgram, you would have to know that that's even a smaller portion of the gram. That is a millionth of a gram, so it's 1 times 10 to the negative 6 grams. And then 1 nanogram is equal to 1 times 10 to the negative 9 grams. So what I'll be doing is I'm going to be solving problems in the near future with these equivalencies. Now, one thing you may note or have learned in the past is that you can say that 1 milligram is equal to 1 times 10 to the negative 3 grams. But also, if you wanted to, you could say that 1,000 milligrams is equal to 1 gram. And so this equivalency is perfectly fine to use in calculations. I think it may be easier to remember this power series here like this. As you get smaller and smaller bits of grams, you have more negative exponents from negative 3, negative 6, negative 9, negative 12, etc. So this is probably maybe in this form here where you have one of the prefix is equal to the exponent of the base unit. That may be the best way to know it. Okay.